We are loading up here. And we've just got a few tasks to go through. I'm actually preparing for the first boss fight, but first I want to change up the appearance a bit. If we're a sorcerer, we ought to look like one. Although, having a little bit of armor helps. Looks like we've got a medium roll, which is pretty much expected when we have low endurance. There may be a way to fix that, but we're going to have to beat Havel first, which not too difficult, but I've been messing it up a lot. So before we go after him, and after we play dress up, we're going to see if we can't get a little bit more. The absurd looking headwear here is the Dust Crown. This is one of the more useful items for sorcery because it actually boosts the damage that your sorcery does by about 20%, I think. It also boosts pyromancies, so it's pretty useful all around. It does apparently lower your magic resistance as well, which could be pretty dangerous if you're in a condition where you're taking magic damage. But fortunately, that's pretty uncommon. It's very unlikely that you're going to be doing that, and there's only a few instances where that would happen on a boss. So it's fairly safe most of the time. I'm going back to the tower where Havel is. Not because I'm going to fight him this time, although I could probably pull it off if I tried. But at this point I'd tried a couple of times and gotten a bit frustrated, so we're going to run past him and do something else. We will be back, but there's a number of other items that we need to prepare ourselves for the first boss we are actually going to fight. I'm sure you might be speculating what that will be, but no telling yet. It won't actually be the first boss area that we enter, but it will be the first boss we fight. Meantime, let's do the undead burg backwards. Apparently we can trigger the flaming barrel trap ourselves. Something I was not aware of. And first we're coming up here to the Taurus Demon's Fog Door. We're certainly not going to fight him. We're just here to kill one of these crystal lizards. It gives us some large shards, which are something that I really wanted. Oh, and Havel's followed us. Isn't that fun? We're just going to ignore him for now. One thing the Drakesword can actually do is most of these blockers can actually have their poise broken in about one Drakesword strike if it's two-handed. So if you wanted, you could just actually power through these guys by two-handed. Just gonna wait for his friends, but they seem to be a bit timid there. And we'll take them both out. The Drakesword is decent for backstabs because it's all physical damage. It'll one-shot pretty much anything in the burg, but 300 so damage that it does, which doesn't scale, remember, stops being all that useful after a while in terms of whether it can one-hit kill anything. Still, it does a lot more damage than anything else we've got. I'm probably a bit too noisy to backstab this guy. Almost turned around. I guess we're not noisy enough with just the gloves and boots from the Elite Knight set. But the heavier the stuff you're wearing, generally, the more sound you're going to make. So if the goal is to backstab everything in sight, well, that's probably not a good idea. The other thing is that the two-handed Drakesword won't be deflected by the Hollow Knight shields, so that's one way that we can break through there. Now the cracked round shields there, they don't block pretty much anything. You can just hit them. It'll reduce the damage, but it won't deflect because that shield has no deflection, as I mentioned. We'll also get the black firebombs, although once our sorcery is fully cranked up, it's not going to really be all that important to have them. Alright, wrong way. what we're doing is working back through the burg to get back to Firelink. There's a couple of ways that we could go, and honestly I probably should have gone down to the lower burg and opened the shortcut in the sewers first. I think it would have been slightly faster, and I don't do that for a little while. But it is fun to go through that fog door there backwards. Like most fog doors, except maybe the Taurus demons, you can go through this from either direction. It doesn't seem to matter. In fact, it'll just sit there. Unlike Demon Souls, it doesn't seem to be a loading point, although in Demon Souls it was possible to skip a couple of fog doors as well. I think the one in 4.2 was skippable if you dropped down properly. And I believe the one in 4.1 was skippable, but only with a glitchy jump, which we will see plenty of. This area you're supposed to get to from the lower area, but you can just jump into it. Spare yourself the ambush. This is actually not the only place in the Upper Undead Burg where you can do an interesting jump. We'll see that in a video or two. In the meantime, it's back to Firelink. This is actually, I think, the first time we've been in this sewer. Might even be the first time we've ever been to this area of Firelink. The poise here is a great help. If you were to get hit by these guys, if you have no poise, they can do a surprising amount of poise damage to you, but if you have at least a little bit, and the Wolf Ring gives you 40, which is more than a little bit, it's not enough, but combined with a few decent pieces of armor, it should be okay. Oop, flubbed that, but as you can see, we have some invincibility frames recovering from a drop attack, so he kind of just randomly stabbed right through me. And Griggs is down here. Griggs is the first true sorcery salesman. There's Rickard sells, I think, soul arrow and heavy soul arrow, as well as a sorcerer catalyst if you're desperate for soul arrows early on. But Griggs has the real stuff.
Splendid. Very well. Well then. Have you heard of big...
Among other things, heavy soul arrow, great soul arrow, and great heavy soul arrow. And the other thing that we're interested in getting here is magic weapon. Magic weapon is a buff that can be applied to certain weapons. It will basically raise your weapon's attack value by adding a certain amount of your magic adjust rating to your weapon damage as magic damage. So it's not actually combined damage, it's split damage. But it's still pretty nice. I believe the multiplier for magic weapon is like 0.8 magic adjust, so only about 80% of your magic adjust total will be added, which isn't very much, but the advantage of it is that it doesn't scale with the weapon, so if you were to use a light dagger or something, it would get just as much attack rating bonus as any other weapon. So it's not that great if you're using huge two-handers, although every little bit of buff does help, but it is really nice if you're using a one-hander, and since this is kind of a lighter build, more dexterity focused and intelligence focused, that's a pretty good choice. In the meantime, we'll pop some souls. We've collected a rather large amount, and I'm going to be trying to use it to buy some of these soul arrow spells. The heavy soul arrow spells cast much slower than... I'm also going to bump my attunement to get myself 2 slots, which is really all I'm planning to need for a lot of time. It would help to have more, but 2 is the absolute minimum for what I'm going to need. For now, we'll do heavy soul arrow and magic weapon. The difference between the heavy and regular soul arrow spells is that the heavy ones have a longer wind-up time that leaves you exposed longer, but they do a lot more damage. Personally, I don't consider the regular soul arrow spells to be all that useful. You can see the kind of slow wind-up time. That actually is improved with dexterity. You can cast faster with high dexterity. Now, I tried to use magic weapon there, and it didn't work. And the reason for that is that the Drake Sword is unbuffable. Many dragon weapons, pretty much all of them, not necessarily all of them, but most of them, can't be buffed. The things that can be buffed are pretty much regular path weapons. I think also Raw and Crystal can be buffed. but I'm not sure. Those have their own downsides, though. A regular plus 15 weapon buffed appropriately is probably stronger for an intelligence build than a magic or enchanted weapon is, under most circumstances. The obvious difference, of course, is that you don't have to buff an enchanted weapon, so it's kind of a one or the other. I might actually get a magical weapon from Rickert early on, just to have it, just because magic weapon isn't the greatest buff. But with 16 intelligence, actually with 15 is all you actually need for greater magic weapon, which is a lot stronger. I went to 16 for some other spells that I might want, though. The problem with buffs is that they fall off if you unequip the weapon, and after a minute or two they'll also disappear. A magic weapon has 5 uses, which is pretty good. It can be used for a long period of time. But at the moment, it doesn't quite outdamage the Drake Sword. Part of that is just the weapons that we have available are not very good. We'll need to go back to Andre. But before I actually waste any shards or souls leveling a weapon up, I want to have a really good one. Fortunately, I have something in mind for that, and it's one of the reasons why I went ahead and grabbed this. Now, looking at the catalysts, you can see the difference here. A Sorcerer's Catalyst scales with our intelligence, but the magic adjust is pretty bad at this intelligence level. It's 119. The Ulasil Ivory Catalyst doesn't scale. It's always going to be 180, but 180 is a whole lot higher than what we would get out of a Sorcerer Catalyst until our intelligence was extremely high. And as it's 180, you can kind of go from there and extrapolate to about how much magic damage gets added to a weapon. The better magic spells, the better buff spells, and also a couple of buff miracles will increase your attack rating in magic damage, and I think in one case with lightning damage, by a much higher amount. Most of the rest of the buffs are at least 1 times your magic adjust, which means you'd get a full 180 at least. The very best one I think is about 2.1, although that one is a very difficult one to have. But if you do cast it, it'll add a ton of magic adjust, which basically means that you could turn a dagger into a weapon that hits as hard as a greatsword, and far more often, with a lot lower stamina cost. That's one of the advantages of buff builds, but obviously one of the disadvantages is that it's not very effective over long periods of time if you run out of buffs, or if you just don't like buffing. I believe the Dust Crown also increases the effect of it, not sure. Now we're up here. We've got our heavy soul arrow, which is pretty effective. It's killing these Balder Knights in a shot or two, which is good, because we want these guys to die. I'm looking for a few things from them, although I'll probably settle for one. We also have to be careful of the channeler. He's the guy up top. He's non-respawning, but he'll cast soul arrows at us. The good news is we can kind of get into a shooting war with him, one that we're going to win because we have access to Estus flasks. Just kind of sidestep there. And he's dead. But he doesn't look like he's dropping anything, unfortunately. The Channelers have a chance to drop a spear called the Channeler's Trident. It isn't very good, but it's one of the rarer weapons, and people who are looking for the Knight's Honor achievement are usually trying to find it. But unfortunately, it's fairly rare. This guy is non-respawning, so if you don't get the Channeler's Trident from him, you have to go to a later area where there are respawning Channelers to get it. It's probably easier to get it there anyway, though, so I wouldn't really worry about it. That Channeler can buff the large horde of hollow guys that are up in the loft of the church. That can make him pretty dangerous, so taking him out ahead of time and then maybe going to a bonfire, it's nice. Now, this is what I was looking for. The Balder Side Sword. I was farming for a little bit. You can see there I got about 14,000 souls. The Balder Side Sword is a straight sword, just like the longsword. In fact, it pretty much has the longsword's moveset, but it's a really excellent weapon. Part of it is that it has good dexterity scaling. It's a little less balanced than the longsword is in that respect. I think it has about a B and a D in, or maybe it's an E in strength, which is fine because we're mostly going with intelligence and dexterity. The other advantage of the Balder Side Sword is its reach. It's a very long sword, and you'll see that once I finally equip it. It's a little bit longer than a long sword, and it's actually a little bit shorter, only a little bit shorter than a claymore, which is a two-handed weapon. But it's a one-handed weapon, so it has the one-handed moveset. That makes it real nice. As you can see, the damage is pretty much the same as a longsword, it just has some significant advantages in its scaling and other things like that. We happen to have just enough titanite shards and souls that we can upgrade this thing to a +5, but until we have the large ember, we can't upgrade it any further. And unfortunately, although I do like it, the +5 side sword at our level of dexterity with just magic weapon isn't quite as reliable as the drake sword is. Still, it's worth showing off. The drake sword still has the 200 physical, which is really good. And the Balder side sword only has about 120 and change physical. A little bit is added by our dexterity. If we use magic weapon, we can get a little bit more power out of it. I hate having to juggle it like this. I prefer having my shield up for when I'm using bolts, but when I want to buff, you have to have it in your left hand, because it'll only buff the object in your right hand. So let's go try it out. First thing you notice, again, look how long that sword is. It's the same sword that those larger shield Balder Knights wield, and it's a really nice weapon, one that a lot of people don't find. Now I put it away, and you'll see that when I pull it back out again, the buff is gone. This is actually useful because the buff stays on for a period of time and you don't want it to drop on you randomly. So what you might want to do at certain times is to actually go ahead and rebuff by putting it away and then getting it. Although it's a long sword that kind of looks like an e-stalker or a rapier, it's not a thrusting sword. So unfortunately it has no bonus critical damage for a backstab or anything like that. It's still real nice though. And as you can see, with the buff, the backstab damage increased considerably. It's a decent weapon right now. It'll be a whole lot better once we can upgrade it to +15. But actually getting it to +15 isn't something we can do easily. Or is it? So I got a little confident here. I went and bought Heavy Soul Arrow during the transition. Great Heavy Soul Arrow during the transition. As you can see, it does a lot more damage. You can even pound right through that Balder Knight shield and kill him. And, flush with confidence, I decided to go fight these Balder Knights again for no apparent reason. And that worked out poorly for me. Go into the second two-handed strike and get riposted. Yeah. Watch out for anybody who can do that. Now, let's try our little friend down in Andre's basement. I have no idea why this Titanite Demon is down here, but it's funny anyway. The Titanite Demon is fairly strong. He's one of the weaker ones. The ones in the Basement Ascent's Fortress are much stronger, and there's one later in the game that's much stronger still. As well as, actually there's two, one in Anor Londo and one in Lost Izalith. The Titanite Demons all operate pretty much the same way, though. They can be staggered, but part of that is I think I broke some of his poise with Great Heavy Soul Arrow. Magic can do a decent amount of poise damage at times, although it doesn't do a lot. Still, sniping him with that when he's trying to shoot us, and then rushing in and two-hand striking him with the side sword with the buff on it, seems to break his poise decently. From here, we'll be going to get some more stuff that we need to fight our first boss.